A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
So, I was thinking about how much of our lives we spend trying to outsmart our own biology. We build these climate-controlled boxes. We stay up long after the sun goes down, and then we wonder why our brains start sending us error messages. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that kind of friction. He is asking about seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, and specifically how things like light therapy lamps, which he playfully called satellites, actually work. He also mentioned a personal experience where staying in a darkened room for a few days for safety reasons made him feel outrageously tired and a bit depressed. It is a great starting point because it hits on that gap between a temporary mood shift and a clinical diagnosis.
It is a fascinating topic, Corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, by the way, for anyone joining us for the first time. Daniel's use of the word satellites really made me chuckle. I assume he is talking about those high-intensity light therapy boxes or perhaps dawn simulators, but the image of someone having a personal satellite in orbit just to beam sunshine into their living room is pretty high-tech, even for him. But his experience in that darkened room is actually a perfect micro-example of what we are talking about. Even if you do not have clinical seasonal affective disorder, your brain is hardwired to respond to light levels. When you cut that off, the system starts to stall.
It makes sense. If I'm sitting in the dark for 3 days, I'm going to feel like a sloth who missed his morning coffee. But there is a line, right? Most people talk about the winter blues like it is just a universal part of living anywhere that gets a bit chilly in January. But Daniel is asking about the clinical side. How do we distinguish between just being bummed out that it is raining and something that requires a 10,000 lux light box to fix?
That is the crucial distinction, and it is one that the medical community has been refining recently. The American Psychiatric Association actually classifies seasonal affective disorder not as its own separate disease, but as a specifier for major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. It is essentially a seasonal pattern. To get that clinical label, you have to show a clear temporal relationship between the onset of depressive episodes and a particular time of year, usually winter, for at least 2 years. We are talking about roughly 5% of adults in the United States who meet those full criteria. That is millions of people who are essentially losing 40% of their year to this condition.
5% sounds like a lot. But what about the rest of us? I know I definitely feel a dip when the clocks change and the sun disappears at 4 in the afternoon.
You are likely in the much larger group. What Daniel is describing, and what a lot of people feel, often falls into what researchers call subsyndromal seasonal affective disorder, or SSAD. Some people just call it the winter blues. An estimated 14.3% of the United States population falls into this category. So, nearly 1 in 7 people are feeling that winter slump even if they do not meet the full diagnostic threshold. It is a massive number of people walking around feeling like their batteries are stuck at 10%.
1 in 7 is huge. And it is interesting that Daniel brought up the geography aspect. He lives in a very sun-drenched part of the world, but he still noticed that mood dip from just a few days of darkness. It makes me wonder about this idea that SAD is only a problem for people in Alaska or Scandinavia. If you are in a sunny place but you are stuck indoors, or if your biology is just tuned differently, does the latitude even matter?
Latitude absolutely matters, but it is not the whole story. The data is pretty stark when you look at the extremes. In Florida, the prevalence is about 1.4%. In Alaska, it jumps to 9.9%. That is a massive swing. However, a major systematic review published in May 2025, which looked at over 32,000 participants across 24 different studies, confirmed that while latitude is a primary driver, there is a ton of variation within those latitude bands. This led to what a heliopsychiatry report in December 2025 called the biology-geography mismatch theory.
Mismatch theory. That sounds like something you would use to describe a bad date, but I assume it is more about the internal clock?
In a way, yes. Think about an expat who grew up in a Mediterranean climate and moves to London, or even someone who stays in a sunny place like Jerusalem but spends their entire day in a high-tech office with no windows. Your biology is expecting a certain level of light input to regulate your circadian rhythms, but your environment is not providing it. Or, conversely, your genetic makeup might be calibrated for a specific light-dark cycle that no longer matches where you live. It is not just about the total amount of light, it is about how your specific suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the brain's master clock, interprets that light.
The suprachiasmatic nucleus. That is a mouthful even for you, Herman. But that is the part of the brain that is actually receiving the signal from the eyes, right? I remember we touched on this in episode 1265 when we talked about designing home lighting. It is not just about seeing the world, it is about the brain knowing what time it is.
And we should probably dive into the mechanics of that because it explains why Daniel's darkened room experiment felt so heavy. You have these specialized cells in your retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. They do not help you see shapes or colors. Their only job is to detect blue light and send a high priority message straight to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. When the SCN sees light, it tells the pineal gland to stop producing melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that makes you sleepy and, in higher doses during the day, can contribute to that heavy lethargic feeling Daniel mentioned. In people with seasonal affective disorder, that melatonin production does not shut off properly in the winter because the light signal is too weak or too short.
So the brain thinks it is still nighttime, even if you're sitting at your desk at 10 in the morning trying to answer emails. And that is where the satellites come in. These 10,000 lux light boxes. I have to admit, 10,000 lux sounds like an aggressive amount of light. Like, are we talking about sitting in front of a stadium floodlight?
It is bright, but not blinding if used correctly. For context, your typical indoor office lighting is usually between 200 and 500 lux. A bright, sunny day outside can be 50,000 to 100,000 lux. So, 10,000 lux is a middle ground. It is enough to mimic the intensity of the morning sun. The July 2025 network meta-analysis in the journal Medicine actually confirmed that white light is the gold standard here. They looked at white, green, blue, and red light, and white light came out on top for efficacy in treating SAD. The protocol is usually about 30 minutes of exposure right after you wake up.
Why 30 minutes? And why the morning? If I am feeling depressed at 8 at night, can I just turn on the satellite then?
That is actually a common mistake. If you use it in the evening, you are telling your brain that the sun is rising just as you should be winding down. That can cause massive insomnia. The morning timing is crucial because it resets the clock for the entire day. It suppresses that lingering nighttime melatonin and triggers the release of serotonin and cortisol, which help you feel alert and stable. As for the 30 minutes, that seems to be the threshold for most people to trigger that biological shift. It usually takes about a week of consistent use to see the full effect, but for many people it is remarkably effective.
It seems almost too simple. You just sit there with a bright lamp while you eat your cereal, and suddenly your brain realizes it is daytime?
It is simple, but it is powerful. An NPR report from September 2025 noted that light therapy is now considered on par with antidepressants for relieving SAD symptoms. In some clinical trials, combining light therapy with an SSR, I like fluoxetine, actually showed an additive benefit. They work on different parts of the problem. The light therapy fixes the timing of the circadian rhythm and the melatonin suppression, while the medication helps with the neurotransmitter levels like serotonin, which also takes a hit during the dark months.
I find it interesting that Daniel mentioned the tired and depressed feeling from a darkened room. It shows that this is not just a psychological trick, it is a physiological response to light deprivation. But what about the other side of the coin? Daniel asked if it affects people in sun-drenched parts of the world. You mentioned the mismatch theory for expats, but what about the people who actually live in the heat? Is there a version of this for the summer?
This is one of the most under-recognized aspects of the condition, and it is something the medical community is finally starting to document more thoroughly. Summer-onset seasonal affective disorder is very real, though it looks different. While winter SAD is often characterized by oversleeping, overeating, and weight gain, summer SAD often involves insomnia, poor appetite, weight loss, and increased anxiety or agitation. A 2025 case report in PMC documented this in tropical regions, specifically citing a patient in Pakistan. In those climates, the trigger is not a lack of light, but often the combination of extreme heat, humidity, and actually an excess of intense light that becomes overwhelming.
That is wild. So you can be depressed because it is too dark, or depressed because it is too bright and hot. It really reinforces that idea of a biological sweet spot. We evolved in a very specific environment, and when we push too far in either direction, the machinery starts to grind.
It really does. And in places like the Middle East or South Asia, you see people retreating indoors to escape the heat, which creates its own weird light environment. You might have intense sun outside, but you are sitting in a darkened, air-conditioned room all day to stay cool. You end up with a confusing signal for your brain. Is it a high noon summer day, or is it a cool, dim cave? That confusion is where the mood disturbances can start to creep in. It is that biology-environment mismatch again.
It makes me think about the socioeconomic side of this too. You mentioned that high-income countries report higher rates of SAD. Is that just because we have better diagnostic tools? Or is it because our lifestyle is more disconnected from the natural cycle? If you are a farmer in a developing nation, you are outside regardless of the season. If you are a software developer in a high-rise, you might go 3 days without a single photon of natural light hitting your retinas.
It is likely a mix of both. Awareness and reporting are definitely higher in wealthier nations, but the lifestyle factor is massive. We have created what researchers call an indoor civilization. We spend 90% of our time inside. When you combine that with a high latitude winter, you are basically living in a state of permanent biological twilight. The 2025 meta-analysis suggested that while latitude is a primary driver, the interaction between your biology and your specific environment is the real key. If you are genetically predisposed to need more light to suppress melatonin, and you live an indoor life in a northern city, you are at a much higher risk. Interestingly, the prevalence also decreases with age, which is something researchers are still trying to fully map out.
So, if someone is listening to this and they are feeling that winter slump, or maybe they are in a hot climate and the summer sun is making them feel agitated and drained, what is the move? Daniel mentioned the satellites which we have established are light boxes. But what else is there? I have heard of those alarm clocks that wake you up with light. Are those just a gimmick?
Dawn simulators are actually a great low-friction alternative. Instead of having to sit still in front of a box for 30 minutes, which is hard for a lot of people with busy mornings, a dawn simulator gradually increases the light in your room over 30 to 60 minutes before your alarm goes off. It mimics a natural sunrise. For people with milder symptoms or those who struggle with morning inertia, it can be a game changer. It starts that melatonin suppression process while you are still asleep, so when you actually wake up, your brain is already in daytime mode. It is much more natural than being jolted awake by a buzzing phone in a pitch-black room.
That sounds way more appealing than staring at a white box while I'm trying to find my socks. But if you do go the light box route, you mentioned it has to be 10,000 lux. I am guessing the cheap ones on those big retail sites that claim to be SAD lamps but only put out 1,000 lux are probably not doing much.
You have to be very careful with the specs. If it is not 10,000 lux at a comfortable distance, you are not getting the clinical dose. Some of the smaller, cheaper lamps require you to have your face about 6 inches from the screen to actually get the rated intensity, which nobody is going to do. You want something large enough that you can have it on your desk or table about 16 to 24 inches away while you do other things. And as that 2025 meta-analysis pointed out, white light is the most reliable choice. Some companies try to sell blue-only lamps, claiming they are more efficient because blue light is what the retinal cells are most sensitive to. But the data still favors the full-spectrum white light for overall efficacy and eye comfort. We actually talked about the blue light versus red light distinction back in episode 850, the color paradox. Blue light is great for waking you up, but in a clinical SAD context, you need that high-intensity white light to really move the needle.
It is also worth noting that this is not a substitute for professional help if things are getting dark, literally or figuratively. Daniel mentioned feeling depressed after just a few days, but if that feeling persists or starts to interfere with your life, a light box might be part of the solution, but it should not be the only thing you rely on.
Because SAD is a specifier for major depression, it needs to be treated with the same seriousness. A psychiatrist or therapist can help determine if it is truly seasonal or if there is something else going on, and they can help you manage the side effects. Some people get headaches or feel jittery if they use a light box for too long, and as we mentioned, using it too late in the day can cause insomnia. It is a powerful tool, which means it needs to be used with a bit of respect for the biology it is trying to influence. Also, we should mention that SAD is diagnosed 4 times more often in women than in men. We do not fully know why yet, but it suggests there might be hormonal interactions with these light-sensitive pathways.
It is funny how we have come full circle. We started with Daniel's anecdote about a darkened room and his satellites, and we end up with the realization that light is basically a nutrient. We talk about vitamin D, but the light itself, the actual photons hitting our eyes, is a fundamental input for our mental health. If you do not get enough of it, or if you get the wrong kind at the wrong time, the whole system starts to wobble.
I love that framing. Light as a nutrient. It is something we take for granted because it is just there, but our modern world has really messed with our intake. We are light-starved during the day and light-polluted at night. For someone in a sun-drenched place like Israel, the challenge might be different than someone in Seattle, but the underlying biology is identical. We all have that same master clock in our brains that is desperate for a clear signal.
And that signal is getting harder to find. I think about the people who move to a new climate and suddenly find themselves struggling. They might not even realize it is the light. They might think it is the new job or the stress of moving, but it could just be that their brain is crying out for a different latitude. That mismatch theory really puts a lot of things into perspective.
It really does. It explains why some people thrive in the heat and light of the tropics, while others feel constantly overstimulated and drained. Or why some people find a snowy, dark winter cozy and peaceful, while others feel like they are sinking into a hole. We are not all calibrated the same way. The goal of things like light therapy is not to override our biology, but to give it the signals it needs to function in the environment we have chosen for ourselves. Looking forward, I think we are going to see more personalized light therapy based on genetic and geographic profiles. We might eventually have smart homes that automatically adjust the lux levels and color temperature based on your specific biological needs.
Well, I think we have covered the spectrum here, from the clinical definitions to the Pakistan case studies and the 10,000 lux satellites. It is a good reminder that our environment is not just the background of our lives, it is an active participant in how we feel every single day. If you are feeling like you are stuck in that darkened room Daniel described, it might be time to look at your light hygiene.
It is one of the most accessible ways to start moving the needle on your mood. Whether it is getting outside for 20 minutes in the morning or investing in a proper light box, the science is very clear that it makes a difference. And as we see more research coming out, like those 2025 studies we mentioned, we are only getting better at tailoring these interventions to the individual.
I'm still sticking with the idea of a personal satellite, though. I think Daniel is onto something. Just beam the sun exactly where I need it.
If anyone can figure out the automation for that, it is probably Daniel. But until then, the light box on the desk will have to do.
Fair enough. Well, this has been a deep dive into the light, even if we spent a bit of time talking about the dark. I hope this gave Daniel and everyone else some clarity on how these things actually work and why that slump is more than just a lack of willpower. It is a biological mismatch that we finally have the tools to address.
It is about working with the machinery instead of against it. I think that is a good place to wrap this one up.
I agree. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the show running smoothly. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. It is amazing what you can do with the right tech and a bit of curiosity.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are finding these discussions helpful or just enjoy the brotherly banter, please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation.
You can find our full archive and all the ways to subscribe at myweirdprompts.com. We will be back soon with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, get some sun if you can find it.
And if you cannot, find a good lamp. Goodbye, everyone.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my wee